So go into that website that I send out, and it'll take you to here, where it will ask you to log in into your Twitter and also authorize the application to your Twitter. Go ahead and press authorize if you do have a account and if you are following along. If not, don't worry about this step. Just sit tight and we are going to start on lecture soon. So I'll give you time to do that. In the meantime, I am going to go ahead and talk about APIs further.
It's not loading for me.
That app.twitter.com.
Yeah.
It's just a gray screen. After you log in and allow it, then it's just a gray screen like that.
I haven't even logged in yet.
Yeah, I'm getting the same gray screen.
If that's the case, let's go ahead and do this. Let's just type in Twitter API in Google search bar. And then with that, we'll click on the first link and then go ahead and log in this way. And this will take you to your items, hopefully.
Yeah, cool, that worked.
Okay. And this is the documentation for the Twitter API. And then we'll do a step back to see how everything works and how everything will look like once we have it, all of the items running. So just go to the main developer.twitter.com and then we'll work around here. So just backing up of what API is that usually we would create our own API, but we can actually use other APIs out there. For example, we can use Spotify API, Twitter, Facebook, Yelp, a bunch of other APIs that we can use. The only difference about those is that they do have some limitations, such as you're not able to have access to full CRUD actions, or you do have full CRUD actions, but you have to be logged in, things like that. So there are some limitations for APIs out there. And then some APIs require you to log in, like what we did with the Twitter API, because it uses your account. So when you're doing the CRUD action, it only does it to your account, not the whole entire database for Twitter. And that's essentially what we're doing here. But other APIs, you're able to use them regardless of whether you have an account with them or not. So it really depends on the API. And an API is just essentially more than a database. So there is a database connected to the API where it stores all of the items that you can have access to. And you're able to do certain data manipulations with that. For example, we talked about the Pokemon API. This has all of the information about Pokemon, as well as their statistics and all of them here. But the only thing about this API is that you're only able to do a GET request. Can't do a post or update or delete. So you're only allowed to do a GET request. And that's an example.
Babe, just bring it in here.
And then with the other ones, like Facebook, Twitter, you're able to see all your tweets and post all your tweets as long as you're online or authorized. So that's what we'll be doing today, is that we're kind of going into a different realm here and seeing how it works with something that needs authentication. So that's what we'll be doing today. So the first step is that you would need to see if your application needs an API. If it does, then I would have that be some sort of a bonus feature with that. And the other decision you need to make is that, are you storing this information on your own app? For our Twitter app, we're able to see tweets and create tweets, but they're doing it on their API. And we need to decide whether or not we need to do it on our database and API as well. But for this example, we're just using their own database and API, so we don't need to worry about ours. We just need to make the connection between the two. So that's what we're doing for today. So let's go ahead and get started. All of the lecture is inside of Neo and is all following this documentation here. So there's some docs here. You can check out their documentations. There is also a tutorial. And what we're doing is that we are creating a application that pulls in all of our tweets from our account. So we'll be doing some of these tweets. And we are also doing a search feature as well as a post for tweeting. So we'll see if we get there. But the first thing is to pull in all of the tweets from our account. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's create a new Rails application, and I'm already CD into my project directory. And this will be called a Twitter feed. And I'll also label this Spring 20. And we need -d PostgreSQL and also -- API. And go ahead and press enter. I'm just going to stick around here for a bit. So then after that is done, go ahead and CD into your application, and then we'll be beginning our to-do items, right? So the first item here is that it does take a lot of work for us to communicate with Twitter. But luckily for us, there is a gem to help us create those API calls to the website. So instead of just trying to figure it out, we're actually going to install a helper gem to help us out. So we'll go into the gem file, and we are going to add in the Twitter gem. And this is our helper gem. Instead of making a crazy request, we can just have our Twitter gem do the work for us. And then I am going to do pry. And then anytime that we're working with any API, we also need our .env Rails, because there are some configuration environment keys that we need to save and use, but we don't want to push that into GitHub. So we need to be able to hide our environmental variables. And anytime you're working with a third-party API or just any API, you would need a .env file to hide those variables. And then let's go ahead and run a bundle for those gems. Again, this is our helper to help us make communication API calls to Twitter. And then we need to hide our environment here with .env. So let's go ahead and continue on with our to-do items. We are going to create the database, bundle exec, break db create. And then I am going to push this up to GitHub. But again, let's be sure that we aren't doing pushing our stuff that we don't want to, such as our Dmv file. So before we forget, go into your gitignore, and we'll create this file shortly. But we are going to hide our .env file in the gitignore, because we don't want to push that into GitHub because that is our keys. And what the keys does is that if other people have access to your keys, then they have access to, in this case, your Twitter account. So they can see all your tweets, they can post all your tweets, delete them, etc.
Quick question, sorry.
Sure.
So when you put just .env here after the config master key, is the config master key saying that this is ignoring always?
This is something else. This
Okay.
already came with the git ignore.
So that's something else we're ignoring.
Yeah.
And the .env will ignore everything that ends with .env?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, cool.
This is more specific to a file because we are going to have a file here called .env. Everything else was already here.
If we had multiple files that ended with .env, would it ignore all of them?
I would recommend if you have multiple .env files, I would just put them all in .env, just one file, and then just have different key value pairs.
Okay.
And I'll show you how that looks like. That way you're not plugging in a bunch of files into your Rails application. You usually need to plug in one and then just load in the keys that you would need.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, so be sure to have your .env file in your git ignore. And then we'll do our get flow. So add, commit, remote, all that. And I am going to call this Twitter feed Spring 20, the same as what I call the app. And then here is where you would plan out your models and your controllers. But for this particular app, since we're just letting all of Twitter handle the data, we actually don't need to create a model. We would need to create a model if we're also storing that in our own database. But for this particular case, there's no need to. So we don't need to generate a model to hold all of our tweets. So while we're at it, let's go ahead and generate the client side as well. So the React side. So I'm going to do it with the yarn command. So yarn create React app. And you can do it whatever way that you remember, like create React app, but be sure to call it client. And this might take a while. While we're at it, let's go ahead and go into our website of our Twitter account feed if you are following along. And then we'll go ahead and create an application and authorize, and also grab the keys as well. So we'll go into here, and then there should be a place that is just for the apps. So if you see this arrow here, go ahead and click on apps. And you should be on this page. You shouldn't see any applications because this is your first time, but you should be able to land on this page here. This is where you would create apps and authorize certain apps to allow you to have certain access to the whole Twitter API. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a whole new app. And this will allow us to have all of our tweets and everything be able here. So the app name, go ahead and name it the same name as what we called it earlier. So that will be Twitter feed Spring 20.
Hey, Henry, would you hold on for just a sec? I have to apply for a dev account.
Yeah, I do as well.
Same
Oh.
here.
Does it say how long it will take for a
Maybe.
response?
Not long at all. I mean, unless they have to like approve the application.
I bet it's pretty quick.
I think on that screen, it says, who are you requesting access for? Make sure that you put, I'm requesting access for my own personal use. And then the account name, you can name it whatever. I just did it what we called it.
Where did you click on the Twitter page to get to here?
Go ahead and press on this little caret here inside of apps, and then click on create an app.
Oh, okay.
Will take you to this page. Hopefully the process is fast and they're able to give you access immediately.
What the heck? They want a 200 word or 200 character response of why we're doing this.
Yeah, let's hold on that. Oh, actually, let me send that out now because we're supposed to do this here as well as every time we have an app. So go ahead and go into Slack, and I am going to Slack out the responses of why you're able to use their app and what we're using it for, and then go ahead and create an app with those responses after you apply for that.
Are we analyzing Twitter data?
Yes. We are not.
No.
Number 2 is we are not.
Will your tweet, retweet, like, follow, or direct message functionality? Will your app use tweet, retweet, like, follow, or direct message functionality? Do you have a pre-written message for that one?
We are tweeting, but none of the other fields.
So we need 100 characters about why we want to be able to tweet.
Just post the same thing as what is in Slack. I think they extended this process even longer. It used to be shorter.
Okay, so I am now done. It actually didn't take that long. It's pretty quick.
That's good.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm good.
Okay, we'll wait a little bit longer. The reason why I ask so many questions is it makes sure that we're not building another Twitter, because for obvious reasons they don't want competition and don't want to steal, don't want to have the ability for others to steal people's data, things like that.
Why do they allow personal projects to use their own APIs, but they're so protective of it? I mean, why not just not let anyone not allow anyone to use their data?
There is a market for it, and then they're also analyzing how we're using it and things like that.
Interesting.
But they don't allow every single feature. That's for sure. So after you're done creating and having authorization for your account, create a new app, and it should take you to this page. And then the app name is called Twitter Feed Spring 20. And then for the application description, we are going to say that we're using this to learn how the API works. And then the base URL, this will be localhost 3000 and 1. So it will be http www.localhost3000.
It just keeps taking me to like a dashboard.
Oh yeah, don't go to the dashboard. Actually click on this caret and click on apps. That's where you want to be.
Yeah, I don't have that. Like, it has me, like, I tried to actually just go in the address bar and put apps/create, like what you have, and
Yep.
it shows up for a second and then redirects me to a dashboard.
So it takes you to here instead.
No, it's
I
like,
think you have to follow that link through the email confirmation.
Yeah,
I
check
did. I did. And I'm like in a developer dashboard.
Are you seeing this here with developer.twitter?
Yes, but it says it's got me in a portal/dashboard, and whenever I try to go out of that, it keeps redirecting me back to it.
Do you see the option create an app?
No.
Um,
No, like it literally shows that page for a split second and then redirects me to a portal that's different.
Yeah, there might be, it might not be fully confirmed then.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, it says I'm one of the special folks using our new developer platform.
yeah, I wouldn't use it.
I can't opt out of it. Okay.
I guess what we can do is that we'll keep on moving forward. We'll build out the apps, and then we'll use different environmental variables, which works fine. So let's just keep on following along, and then we'll see how everything goes by break, and then we'll see if things change. So this website URL, that would be the website for the production level URL. So you would need to replace that. But for ours, we're just learning how the Twitter API works. So we're just having localhost 3000. And the callback URL is also localhost 3000. All the other URLs we actually don't need. And then with this one here, just copy and paste those items that I posted in Slack earlier. So I am going to go here.
Henry, did you enable sign in with Twitter?
No, we don't need that. That's only if your application needs to be able to log in with Twitter. And then go ahead and press create.
Sorry, I got a little behind. Do we want to enable sign-in?
No, we do not want to enable sign-in.
Okay. And we don't have to put in any of these other URLs?
Nope, it's just the callback URL and the website URL.
Okay, cool.
It's telling me that I've got app name errors, that this name is in use.
Oh.
Yeah, it has to be a unique name.
Yeah, it has to be a unique name.
That's silly.
Put your last name at the beginning of it or something.
No, we got it. Cool.
So right here, this is where your keys and tokens are. And then that's what we'll be filling in for our environmental variables. So we'll take a look at that shortly. So let's continue on.
Sorry, I am holding you up, but it says localhost 3000 is invalid.
3001?
Yeah, it's 3001, and there should be a www in front of it.
Oh, okay.
So let's go ahead and create the .env file. And also a .env example. Because if other people are using this app, or if other people are looking at it at the GitHub, then they need to also know that you do need environmental variables. And for this particular API, we actually need 4. So we need to have those 4 here, and I'll select this out.
It's on the example.
Is on both the EMV and the example.
Can you add things to your git ignore after you've pushed?
If you push that file that you want to ignore, then no, it won't take into account that you're ignoring that. So I would actually do it before you push it. So with this, let's go ahead and fill in the .env file with keys. Again, you can find those keys and tokens inside of that tab here.
Hey,
So
Henry,
yes.
this using the env files, this is something we do in production for like different environments.
No, this is only for development. In production, we actually need to put it inside of Heroku.
Right, but wouldn't you do that in case, I mean, in like a real life scenario where you had like a development, like a staging in a production environment, have like different env variables to set up different testing environments?
In some cases, yes, but with this one, you don't need to.
Not with this case specifically.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the way the Twitter API works, it has a very specific name for all of the keys and tokens. So we need to keep them how it is for now.
So I guess if you had like your own React app, you could have different variables for like the services that you use. You could, I don't know, like host it on a different setup in order to test stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
We did an example on that when we did the image hosting with DropZone.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Cloudinary. Okay. And that has different environments with testing, development, and production.
Gotcha.
So that one should work as well. But with this particular case, you would have to put it in Heroku. And then let's go ahead and grab the environmental variables from here. I'm going to do this off screen because, again, you shouldn't share this with anyone.
Which one's
push
which?
it up to GitHub. So if you go into keys and tokens, the consumer API keys on the top, there's 2 of them. There's the API key and API secret. Those are for the first 2, for lines 1 and 2.
That's consumer.
Yes. And be sure to put them into strings. Now with the access tokens, you have to generate a new one, and they also expire. I don't know what Twitter policy is, but they do expire, so you have to update these tokens regularly. And you would press the generate, and then it'll give you access to the access tokens as well as the access token secret. So you would copy that and put those into lines 4 and 3 and 4.
Is that on just on the ENV? The ENV example is blank, right?
Yes, that should be blank because that one isn't in the git ignore.
So I have one called a bearer token.
No, it should be
Is that the right
called.
one?
It should be called API key and API secret, and then access tokens.
An access secret. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So is that single or double quotation for the string, Henry?
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
Just keep it consistent. And I'll give you some time to do that. In the meantime, let's double check for sanity check to make sure that it is not there.
Do you need like any special spacing after the equal sign or?
Nope.
Okay, cool.
Make sure that they're like this for each of them.
Okay, yep.
And the next step is very important because this will load up all the keys and the values for our application to have access to the application here on Twitter. And if you want to change permissions, you can. In most cases, you want both read and write. But in some cases, for private reasons, you can just have them read. So you're able to see tweets, but you're not able to post, things like that. So for this next step, we need to load these into our app. And we also need some other helper functions too. So go ahead inside of this lib folder. Again, what the lib folder is, I know we talked about this in Rails Day 1, but essentially this is what where our helper classes will be. And this is anything to assist our application into doing certain items. For example, like looking at our timeline for Twitter, as well as our loading up our keys, because that is very important. So inside of the lib folder, create a new file and call this Twitter_client. Twitter_client, and this is a Ruby file. And inside of this, go ahead and go into Slack and copy this whole class inside of this particular file. So it should look like this. So it's in the lib folder and a file called Twitter client, and it is a Ruby file. And then paste what you see on Slack into here. Again, this part here is very important because this loads up our keys and have access to our application for Twitter. So to use any key value pairs, you would need the capital EMV and then what the key is here, and that will give you the value. And we're making a request here for the Twitter using a special API call to load up these individual keys. So we need to do this every now and then to make sure that we're logged in and authorized. And then what these methods are, they allow us to have access to certain abilities on Twitter, such as grabbing the home timeline of your account, as well as to update a message or to tweet out a message. So be sure to have that there. Now, for this to actually work, because this is just defining a class, we actually need to load this into Rails itself. So this will constantly be running. So inside of the config, and when Rails first it starts in the config folder and it runs all the configurations to start up the Rails. What we want to do is inside of the config folder application file, I'll just scroll down and in between lines 20 and 21, I'll just do a new line on top of the module as well as the bundler. And just paste what I posted in Slack here. Just loads up all of everything that we put inside of lib, which is the client, which loads up all the keys. We are running that right when Rails starts their server. And that's what we want to do next. So be sure to go into the config folder, application.rb, and then copy what you have in Slack and paste it right here in between the bundler.require and then the module of your app name.
Could you technically just build this straight React because we don't need a backend?
No, because with React, you have the ability to make API calls only if you're locally. But if you want to have other API calls, like external API calls, like what we're doing here, you actually need a tool like what Rails has for you, such as this here. So you actually need this part here for your app to work. And then let's go ahead and let's generate our controller. Again, we don't need a model because we're not saving it to our database. We're just doing it on Twitter. So it will be bundle exec Rails G controller. And since this is an API, we need to do API/tweets. And we need the index so we can show all of them. And we also need a skip route. With React, it also blocks any requests going out of it. And it's a pain to undo that. But with Rails, it's actually easier to put all of the requests to be able to have third-party requests. If you just want to use just React, you may need to use another server-side language, like Node.js could help you out with that, or PHP.
Good deal.
In this case, we're using Rails.
Well, in that same vein, how popular is Rails?
Really depends on the location where you are. In the Bay Area, a lot of people use Rails. But here, a lot of people uses just Ruby as well as PHP, very slightly, but most people use Node.js or other things.
And this is in conjunction with React?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Interesting.
So everyone has their own stack. Like Google has their own stack, Facebook, Twitter, they all have different stacks. So it's usually some front-end language and then some sort of back-end language.
Yeah, okay.
But they all work very similar. So once you know the pattern of one, then you know the others. So after we created our controller, let's go ahead and fill out the routes. That way we will have access points to the controller. So we are going into the config folder, routes, and let's go ahead and fill in our routes. So we need to have a namespace API because we are using our Rails API. Do end, and then resources routes for tweets. But in this particular case, I only want the index. And then we'll be adding more routes as we add in more features. For now, let's just do one feature at a time of loading in all of the tweets, and then we can focus on searching and posting all of that.
What does tweets correlate with? Is that on our controller?
Yes, that's the name of our controller. We called our controller tweets here.
Got it. I see.
So this only renders out the tweets index because we only did only here. So it won't generate all of the CRUD action for our side. So go ahead and go into app controllers, API tweets controller, and inside of the index, we are going to render JSON. And we're using our tweet client. So Twitter client, make sure that they are capitalized like that. Dot home underscore timeline. This is referring to that file that we created in the lib folder, where it brings in all of our home timeline after it fills in all of the API keys. So it does the API keys first, and then it will do this here. That way it knows which timeline it is pulling in. And that is all that we need to do for now for the backend. But again, we are doing more features, so we will be coming back to the backend in a bit. But before we go on break, let's actually set up our front end. So we already did the Yarn create client, and go into your client folder, package.json. We need to add that proxy. So it'll be proxy. And it is http://localhost 3000. And I do need double quotes for this. Um, 3001, because that is where our Rails server will be. So be sure you have that in your package.json, which is in your client folder. And I'll slack this out too. And then we need to do our housekeeping items for the React side. So that is our first housekeeping item, is connecting both the Rails and React applications together. And then here, let's go ahead and create a new tab, or you can do a new panel. I did it with Command-Shift-D. I'll zoom in. And this is where we'll be in the client folder. So in this particular one, I'm going to cd into client. So make sure you're in the client folder for this next step, or else you'll end up pushing up node modules. So be sure you're in the client folder here. So we need to add some packages. So yarn add. We need to make Axials calls. So we need Axials. For this example, I'm not going to bring in React Router. I'll just have it be a single page application just to save up on time. So we won't be using React Router. But we are going to style a bit. So we'll do semantic UI React, as well as semantic UI CSS. So just these packages for now. But in your applications, you might have different cases. But for this one, we're just taking it simple. And then we do need to do some configurations for our application. So inside of our client folder, inside of source, index.js, I'm going to remove the service worker. And we need to import our styles. Again, you need to do this in the index.js because we want it globally. If you put it in other component folders or even in app.js, it wouldn't have access to the whole app potentially. So this is to ensure that you have it through the whole app, you would put it in the index.js. So we want to bring in semantic UI CSS with semantic.minify.css file.
What is minify?
So instead of having a whole entire CSS file like this, it's just a minified version of it. So it actually is compressed into a smaller format.
Okay.
And then for this example, we are going to use our app.js instead of for routes like we usually do. We actually will be using that for a higher order component. So we'll be doing that here. So I am going to delete everything. And this is going to be a logical component. So I need to import component from React. and then keyword class, app extends component. And then while we're at it, we'll do a render and return.
How come we aren't using hooks?
There is a drawback for this, and I'll tell you why that is. Because you technically can use hooks, but the way that we're bringing in our application, also with the way VS Code works, it actually will hit our limit for the Twitter API. We don't want that.
Huh.
So it's actually a safer bet for learning purposes to use a logical components, but you could put this into a hook, but just you have to turn off your autosave as well as your server, or else you'll hit your limit for the day. And Twitter has 1,000 API limit, but if you're doing autosave on, it will reach that within a few minutes. So that's why we're not using hooks right now, because the use effect actually runs twice for this particular way that we're writing it. But if you do want to use hooks, just be sure that you are turning off autosave, and then you can see how we did it here in the lecture. So this is what we are doing inside of a hook format. So that will be in Neo. So before we go on break, let's actually set up our app.js. So we are going to store tweets. And for now, it will be an empty array for the client side. But we will fill it with a component did mount, a lifecycle method. So when this is mounted before it's rendered, we need to run whatever's inside of these curly braces, which we need Axials for. So let's go ahead and import Axios from Axios. And we are going to make an API call. So Axios dot, and if we run our server, we actually need to hit this route that we created here inside of the config routes. Here, this is what we will be hitting. And what that route is it is a GET request because it's an index, and it's just /API/tweets. And then we'll do our error handling and our promise handling here. So it'll be res. I'm actually going to do this in one line. So I'm going to do this dot set state tweets equals res dot data. So that'll bring in all the tweets coming in from the controller, which then is coming in from our Twitter online. And we'll do a catch. Error. And I'm just going to console log the error. And then for now, we'll just stub out something from semantic. And I'll give you a quick insight of how to make things more responsive to make things look good on different screens. So I am going to import a grid from semantic. And every single style library has some sort of a grid system. But for semantic, it's capital G grid. And the things that you would need to know is that how each library handles their grid. Usually is a 12-column grid. So you just split up your whole screen into 12 columns. But with semantic, it's actually 16 columns. So you split up your screen into 16 equal columns. So here, I'm just going to have a grid here. And I want 2 rows. But there won't be an even set of rows if we're looking at them on the computer. But we're looking on them with mobile or tablet, then they should take up the full screen. So we'll do a grid dot row here. So this is a single row, and I will have 2 columns here. So this grid would be a column. And again, for mobile view, this will be how many columns you want it to take up. Since mobile is a smaller screen, we'll just have it take up the full width, which would be 16. Same thing with tablets as well. But for the computer, I just want to take up 4 columns. And then I am going to duplicate this, but change the computer for the second column to be 10. So there will be a little bit of space in between. So this one will be the bigger column, so it will take up this amount. And then this will be a smaller column here. Again, you can use hooks, but be sure your server is off as well as your autosave is off too, because you'll hit that limit.
Hey, would you mind slacking this out? I just couldn't type as fast as you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you.
So we just stub out the app. So let's go ahead and if you're using hooks, turn off autosave because this will break. Let's go ahead and run both of our servers. We'll do Rails s-p 3001 for our Rails server, and then yarn start here for our client server. And this will take you to localhost 3000. And hopefully I don't have any crazy tweets popping up. Awesome. So, looks like there aren't any errors. That's awesome. So you should be seeing a blank screen. Your app isn't broken at this point.
Can you go to your app.js?
Yes. Just copy and paste what I have in Slack. The most important part is this lifecycle method here. But the most important thing here is that even though it's blank, if we check inside of our DevTools, inside of the components, and we click on app, we do have some tweets here, which is awesome, which is what we want. In each of these tweets, they have a bunch of details we can use, like favorite count, language, place, text, etc. So it's actually loading up our tweets, and our tweets are coming from our account. So now we have tweets to work with. Now the next step is just to display them, and then we'll see how else we can manipulate the data. So let's go ahead and go on to break. Come back at 7:15. Already configure our application on Twitter to our own application here. And then here, we just set up our client side to be able to receive the tweets. And we are able to see all the tweets here and all of the tweets data here. So we'll be using this later in our next step. So just to save up on time, go ahead and create a new file. Technically, you're supposed to do your folder structures, but again, we're just saving up on time. We are going to do a tweets.js. And then go ahead and head over to Slack, and I'll Slack out this component out. Because we've been doing this before, it's just mapping through all of the tweets and formatting them into a single item. So that will take some time, but might as well just copy and paste it because we've been doing something like this before. So then you refresh your items, you refresh your page. we should still have our tweets go in, but then we need to implement this inside of our app. So let's go into our app.js, import the tweet from /tweets like that. Because it is outside of the folder or in the same folder, so it'll be /. But technically, you're supposed to be organized and put in a component and then tweet folder. But save up on time, we'll put everything here. And then we'll actually be putting this component inside of the 10 column level here. So around line 23. Because we'll be using this for the search feature. So this will be tweets component. And this component actually needs tweet for it to map through and list out all of them in a format. So we'll pass in tweets through props. And this is from this .state because that's where they're being stored right now. So I'll also slack out the app.js. So now you can see all of these tweets in a formatted way. So you're able to display tweets and all their information. For now, we're just doing the profile image, user, text, and the URL. But you can actually put more items, like how many likes it has, or other options that you can put. But I just put 4 for now. So these are all the tweets from your own Twitter account. So now, yes.
It's not doing anything, but it's not giving me an error.
Do you have any tweets on your Twitter?
Is it tweets that I have tweeted?
No, this should be your home timeline.
Yeah,
So I just looked in my Rails server and it says that Twitter couldn't authenticate me. So check that.
Yeah,
Because I have the same issue.
That might mean that your keys might be off.
I'll just go tweet and test it.
And then also check if this file's correct. But you should be able to see some tweets. And then let's go ahead and go back to the app.js. And let's actually fill in a different set of tweets. So let's build a search bar. So we actually need to have 2 items be stored. And now the first item will be the array of objects of what is visible. So instead of showing everything, it will actually show whatever the input box types. The other thing is that we need to be able to know what we're searching for. We'll be storing that both in state. And then for this next part, I'll slack this out as well, is that we need a modified handle change as well as an update visible function. So go ahead and put this right under the component did map. So this updates the state, but it actually does it through our API call. So this update visible function, what it does is that if there isn't anything in the search bar, then just do all of the tweets. But if there is something, then we need to search up what the term is in the front end to the back end. And that back end will return to us the items that are matching those parameters. So that is what we're doing here. And let's go ahead and inside of the 4 column, we'll do input. We'll do a header, sure. And let's go ahead and import that up top. So we need a header and an input. So be sure to import that up top. And with this header, I am going to say search. Just for styling's sake, I'll do text align center. And then here for the input, our input actually needs a few things. And this is actually a little bit different than our form inputs because we're actually relying on the API rather than building it ourselves. So it still does need value. And this is coming from this .state.search. And then the on change is the handle change. So that those two are correct. But we don't need a name here because of the way we're handling the handle change, because there's always a default value of search. So we don't need to put the name here. You could, but it would be a little bit redundant. And then the icon that we would use is that the name of it will be called search. And then it will be circular. These are just other options you can have within the input. And then lastly, we'll do a placeholder of search. So that's what your input will look like. And this is the whole app file for now. So let's backtrack just a bit. Because of the way we're doing search, we actually need to have Twitter handle that. So our handle change would be a little bit different. And because we're doing it through our Twitter API. So we need to store all the visible items here in our search query here. So when we do a handle change, whatever you type in would be, if you don't type anything in, it will be all the tweets that you see here. But if it is something, then we need to be able to do an Axials call to a specific location, which we'll create next. And it will filter out only those results, not all of the tweets, but only those that you're searching to. And with the Twitter API, you actually need to have 3 characters for you to type in here in order for it to work. If you're just typing in D or C, it might not work immediately. That's why we have this logic here, is that if it's greater than 3 characters, then we are going to run this here. So that's our app.js. Let's actually do that in our backend for it to communicate to our Twitter API. So let's go back into our routes. So config routes, and we need to create a route for this to work. So it'll be a GET request, and we called it search in the front end, so we'll call it search in the back end. And this will go into our tweets controller search function. So tweets controller search method. So that is our resources routes for search. So let's go ahead and fill that in. And we also need to do it in 2 places. The first place is inside of our controller. So let's go ahead and create another method of search. And all it is it will be render JSON our Twitter client again, because that's where we'll be putting in the logic of .search. And then we are putting in the parameters of term. Whatever the term that's coming in.
You've got a typo on your render there.
Thank you. So this is your Twitter controller. And then for this to work, we actually need to go to our Twitter client inside of our lib folder and specify how that will look like. So go ahead and hop into Slack, copy that method that I have in Slack, and we are going into the lib folder, client, Twitter client, and paste that here right above private but under self.tweet. This is the logic you would run to do everything to communicate to the API. So we're searching through with the term, and then for each of the items, we need to return the user, ID, text, and with their screen name, profile image, and URL. And then eventually return back the tweets, which is just the results that come back with the query. So let me Slack out this whole file out. So again, this is the lib folder, Twitter client. Now let's see what's going on. It looks like there is some issues here. And it looks like for me, I did hit too many requests. So let's actually stop the server. I think my auto save is on. Dang it. File auto save off. Hopefully I did not hit full. I did not hit the full 10,000. So hopefully this still works. Or else we'll just be seeing an empty page, which would not be good. Yeah, it looks like I made too many requests for today because my autosave was on. Dang it. So we'll continue on, and hopefully this will work tomorrow once our limit is reset. So let's go on with that. That is important why you need to turn off your autosave as well as your server, because we already hit 100,000 requests and it hasn't even been 2 hours yet. So let's assume that works. It may be working for you, it may not, but let's assume that that search works and you're able to look at the items that you search with. Maybe after this is done, I'll pull up a working application and we'll see how the fully working application works. But let's go ahead and do our next item. Again, we can't really test it right now because we reach our limit. But now let's go ahead and do our tweet feature. So inside of our app.js, technically we should put this in its own component, but again, let's just put it here. We are going to have a tweet here inside of the state. And then with the tweet, I am going to do this. Just go ahead and hop into Slack and copy this into this here.
Hey, Henry.
Yes.
So it's not giving me any errors or warnings even, but it won't render anything in the local host.
Does it say this in your controller, in your Rails?
No. It says it's completed, okay. 200.
That might be a syntax error somewhere. So I would look back in the previous Slack messages and make sure everything is there.
Okay.
So I just posted what I just posted in Slack recently and the updated and post tweet functions here. So this will update the state to whatever tweet that we are sending. And this actually makes the request in the back in the Twitter API. So let's go ahead and build this out. I am going to have another input here of header. And this is where our tweet item will be here. So tweet something. And then the input, since there's only one input, we can just not build out a form. So we can just use this. And it will have an on change of this function here of update tweet. So this will be this dot update tweet. The value, this.state.tweet. And then the button here. Of tweet. And this will have a event listener of on click of that function of post tweet that we have here, which communicates to our backend.
Henry, how come we didn't do a button with the search bar?
Since there's only one item here, we can just press enter.
Okay. Mine's not working, but I'm not getting an error.
Oh, yeah. Well, we need to take a look at the working version, make sure everything's in order.
Yeah, I'm getting the same thing. I'm not searching, but I'm not throwing any errors either.
So it's just blank. Are you getting too many requests like I am?
No, I'm not getting too many requests.
No.
No, I'm pulling all the data. It's just when I hit search, it just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, mine's not functioning. Like it's just not doing anything.
Yeah. It's really hard to debug because it could be a lot of issues.
And you can't look at it right now. So
Yeah. But I'm going to assume that it doesn't work because there's too many requests going on. So let me go ahead and Slack this out. And this is how we would tweet out. Hopefully our form renders. Or not. Okay.
Mine is. My tweet something.
yeah, my tweet
Okay.
something shows up. You need to import button from semantic.
Yeah.
That's what it was. That's what I had to do.
Let's go ahead and import button. And let me re-Slack this out and also save again. Hey, my stuff works. Yes.
Ooh.
Okay, everyone look at my screen. This is how the search should be working. Let's say I press in NASA, more than 3 characters. This should update to those items. Or not. Okay.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not just me.
We'll go ahead and debug that right now then. So I think let's go ahead and see what's going on. Because essentially we just copy and paste most things over. I don't think is our form because we are getting the term NASA back here. It might be our backend. And it also might be us going over the limit too. So this would be search with the parameter of terms. And it should be singular. And then inside of our Twitter client, let's go ahead and see what's going on here. So I'm going to put binding.pry here right before this here. And let's try this again. So I am going to put Kent. I would definitely follow him on Twitter. He is really active. Does everything react? And it looks like it's not reaching this level. That's because I didn't save. Because I turned off my autosave. So let's do this again. Let's do NASA again. There we go. We finally hit our debugger. Our pry, I mean. Let's take a look at tweets and let's see what that is. Yep, that looks like all of the tweets. That doesn't look like anything strange.
So it's just
I know what's going on. I forgot one step. So let's go ahead and remove that pry. And I messed up. So here, the reason why it's showing all of the tweets here is that's exactly what we're saying here. just show all of the tweets. Instead, we don't want to see all of the tweets. We actually want to see all of the visible tweets. So this, instead of tweets on line 62, would be visible. So let me slack this out. And now
Now
might
you see no tweets though.
hit my limit again.
No, I can't see any either.
Yeah. Are we
'Cause
setting?
we haven't defined what visible is.
Yeah, it is in state. So all those tweets should be in state. So now if I type in NASA, it should only bring in the NASA tweets like this. So now that should be able to
Oh
work.
yeah.
It
Okay.
just takes a sec to bring in the data. Okay. So now that we have visible fix as well as the
Mine's
search
blank.
bar, is yours
Try doing a search.
I would just wait for a bit after you do search because it does take a while for it to pull in all the tweets.
I mean, my search works, but it doesn't bring up anything unless I search.
Now blank out your search and hit enter again. That's what I had to do. It like reset it.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah. Okay, but yeah, that's something to note. It's because we need pull in from visible, not from tweets. Because visible is changing depending on our search. So if it's 0, then it's everything. But if it's whatever we type in, it will be filter out to those cases there. So now our search feature is up and running. Cool. So now let's get this working. This doesn't fully work yet. So let's go ahead and get that fully working. So we already have the input and the button, as well as our update and post tweet for the front end. We just need to do a similar thing to the back end. So let's go into our routes, create another route for this to be hit. And this will be a post request because it is a form. And we are posting a tweet in this case. To tweet, there's a string, tweet controller, and it would be the tweet method. That is essentially my my create, if you think about it that way. So now let's go into our controller and do another method here. Let me select this out. Of tweet. And what this would be is that we are just going to use our Twitter client again, .tweet, and then render JSON that tweet. So Twitter client .tweet, because we do have a method inside of our Twitter client called tweet here, which just creates a method from our API. And we need to use our params. And we called it tweet. That's what the data is coming back here. That is what the data is called, tweet. Then we will render JSON the tweet. Because this will give us a tweet coming back from this method. Okay, let's hope this is up and running. So let's go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to slack out this controller, and then we'll go ahead and save everything and slack things out. So here, let's go ahead and tweet something Hello, this is from my app. Go ahead and press tweet. It won't do anything, but if you go into your Twitter account, hopefully there's a new tweet. Here is my Twitter account. You can tell because of this image. From 13 seconds ago, that says, hello, this is from my app. And that is how you tweet with our API here. So let me back up and we'll break down each of the features and see how they work. And then we'll go ahead and go on our last break because we did cover a lot in a small amount. So with our applications, we're able to see all of the tweets in our home feed, as well as be able to tweet from our application into our Twitter account and into search specific tweets. So those are 3 of the features we're doing. So we'll break them down one by one. And then we'll go in between files just to show you how the flow is for each of the file. So here, when you're looking at all of the tweets, we are looking at this component here. This just lists them out and map them through all the tweets coming back from our Twitter home timeline. So as you can see here in our app.js, this is filled with our component did mount. So this component did mount goes into a specific route, and that route goes into our controller of our index here. And what this goes into is our Nother file, our helper file of our Twitter client class, the home timeline method. So it goes into our Twitter client class, home timeline method. So it does a client, which is what this here is, which loads up all of our environmental keys to make sure that you're authenticated and also secure. And with that returns to you a user, and they will be the user.home timeline.
Hey, Henry, quick question. Are all of these things, could they be found on the Twitter developer tools, or did you have to write these out yourself?
So they are on the documentation, but they are a little bit embedded. So like tweets here, if you want to see all of the tweets, it will be with the get tweets object, etc. So their documentations is a little bit scattered everywhere. But everything is inside of the lecture notes in this video, so that's a much more formatted place. But yeah, see if there's any other documentations for whatever your API is using, just so you can get a clear cut of how to use them. So with that home timeline, we have all of the tweets return back to us. So then that will return a whole array of objects here in the index, which then inside of the app.js, this array here is full of all of our tweets from our home timeline. So then that would render a whole timeline here. And that's how that is working. With our search, what we have is an input here, and we have some logic going on. And we need to store a few items. We need to store what is visible to the user when we're searching, which is the array of tweets, what the search query is, what exactly is we're searching. So that's what these 2 methods here. So with these 2 methods, it's a modified form input. The reason why it's modified is because that we need to be able to set the state immediately as soon as they type into the input, instead of waiting for you to submit the form and for you to continue on with the application. So with this logic, if you don't have anything in it, then it will return all the tweets like normal. So the original array of tweets. But if you do type something and it's more than 3 characters, then it does an API call to your backend. And it passes in the search keyword, whatever you put in inside of this box here, the input box, it'll pass that in and call it term, whatever the term you're looking for. So it'll go into your routes, and your routes will lead you into the controller. And inside of the controller, we are taking in the term that we're looking for in the visible section. And we are taking that into our helper file here inside of Twitter client, which is in the lib folder. So here, inside of the search in the Twitter client class, we're searching for the form. Again, it runs this every single request. So make sure that you're using your own account. That's what client is, it's your own account. And it searches for the term, and it will return to you the array of tweets that matches that term. And what we're doing with that array of tweets is that we're looping through them with the each do loop, referencing each one of those as tweet, and then we are returning these items from that tweet, such as ID, text, user, etc. After we have all of those items, we then are returning this array of object of all of the tweets that matches that search term.
Hey, Henry,
Yes.
I have a question. What does the break do?
Oh, this one here. So if the user, so we're setting a variable here. So if the user created this tweet, then we'll break out of it. We actually don't want it. We actually only want a specific tweet. So this correlates to the user logic here.
Okay.
That's a
sounds
good question.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, if there isn't a user, then we'll just break out of this and continue on to the next tweet. Because this does require the user information.
Okay,
So-
so sorry. I just want to understand. So basically, like if there's not a user, it'll just go back to the main page.
It will just go to the next index. So the next tweet that's looping through.
Okay, okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
And then at the very end, it returns you a whole array of tweets, a whole array of objects back to the controller. And that's what we are returning back. And inside of app.js, we are setting this into our state of visible. So we're loading up all of that search query inside of the visible in our state. So then when we do show it, we need to change this from tweets to visible. That way that we only see what is whatever the user is typing here. So those are the items that are visible. It's the tweets that meet a specific term. And it doesn't work for some reason. Yeah, it was working. So that's how the search works, is that it will search for a term and it will return to you all of the results back and load it up into your state here. And we're able to use that to change our items. So now let's go ahead and see how this tweet works, this tweet functionality. So with that, we need another input and a button to tweet. And the logic to handle them is with these two functions here. So with these two functions, this just sets our value of whatever we tweet into state. That way it's stored somewhere. So that's what this update tweet does, is that it stores it into our state. Think of it as a handle change, but technically we already have a handle change for our search. So we need to call this something else. We just call it update tweet. And when we do an on click, this is technically our handle submit. So with our handle submit, we are bringing in tweet and visible. And what we are doing is that if the tweet exists, like if there is a tweet that the user types in, then we make a Axials request to our backend. So this is a post request that goes into our API tweet. And we're passing in the tweet that the user types in. So that goes into our routes, which then redirects you to this controller. So with this controller, with this method, it will take you to that lib file again of our helper file, and we'll do the tweet method with the parameter that we're passing in. And then finally render back that tweet that we just created as well. So let's go to our Twitter client and we'll see what the tweet is. And all it is just a message, and we are updating it back into our front end. And then what it does is that once we hit enter, it will then go into our Twitter page and then tweet out our app using our account. And that's how the ad works. So any questions about our application with our Twitter API?
I'm a little bit confused on the twitter.client.rb and where you got some of these things. So I mean, and I know you kind of answered this before, but are these coming directly from developer tools of saying, hey, if you're trying to grab this, then grab this, or where did you kind of come up with these?
So with this code inside of the Twitter client, so let's back up a bit. So everything in our controller handles the CRUD actions, but it does it through our Twitter client. And technically we could do it here, but it's actually much more safer if we did it in this particular file. And it also separates our concerns of what we're doing for each of them. So the other one just handles CRUD actions. This one will handle the actual communications from our application to our Twitter application here.
And what's the reason you separate it? I know you say it's a separation of concerns and it's safer, but what's the liability to put it within your controller?
It's preference. It's really up to you. You can put it wherever it is you want. But with this particular case, I can use any of these methods in any controller. If I just put it in that single controller, I only have access to it within that controller only. But with this way, I can have access through it throughout the whole entire app.
Huh, okay.
Yep. And then with this, the main thing is these last lines here. This is what connects your application to the one you created on Twitter. That gives you access to all those features with the Twitter API of creating tweets, looking at tweets, things like that. And that's what we're doing at every single one of these methods, is that when we're calling client, it's actually running this code here. So every time that we're running client, it loads up our environmental keys and token access and all of that to be sure that we're logged in and authenticated. So then with that, then you have access to whatever it is in your within the API tools here. So I wonder if we can find it here. If we're doing a search tweet here, which is exactly what we have, our items, they really updated these documentations. Is that if you want access to the results, you would do a dot and then whatever method it is that you call it. So then you can do like an operator, things like that, search query, additional things. So these are all coming from the documentation. So this one here is what they were talking about. So if we want to search for something, we need to pass in the dot search and then some sort of term for it to be loaded up. So that's just from the documentation. And then there's other things like updating a tweet, things like that. So these here are all from the tool that you're using. And that's what the purpose of this file is. It's just to help us communicate to our whole application for us to have access to those features. Any other questions?
So if you were going to do something like Google Maps API, it'd be the same type of thing. You'd create a Google client Ruby file and have all the documentation needed there.
Yeah. So let's say that we're using this for another API. Where do things change? That's a good question. It really depends on the documentation. So follow those documentation. And luckily for us, we have our Twitter gem. And check if you have some sort of gem to help you out with your API. Google Maps, I know, has it, as well as Spotify and all of them. So that will make things better for your case. Because then you can just call the methods like this, just like home timeline, instead of doing a weird request, like an Axials request like this to communicate to your API.
I see.
Yeah.
Cool.
So this will help us out a lot. And I'm wondering if the Twitter gem has a good documentation that we can look at. I actually don't know who this is from. Hopefully it's this one. Yeah. So what this particular gem, you can just do whatever the client is. Again, that just loads up your authentication keys, and you can just do .followers, and it will give you all the followers, as well as user timeline, home timeline. This is where these terms are coming from, like home timeline, update, search. It's actually coming from the gem, which then translates into our application into our Twitter site. So this is what we are using for this particular case. And for different APIs, they have different gems. For example, for the Spotify gem is very similar of what will be. It's very similar to the API for Twitter. Why does it not pull up? It's called our Spotify, by the way, the gem for the Spotify API. And with it, you're able to do like the album, artist, playlist for yourself, things like that. So see if you can do it with the gem. That way you can just call a method, and that would be much more better. Or else you'll have to make requests, and the documentation has a specific rule of how you would make that request. Like for example, if we were to do it with a request, according to Twitter, we need to pass it in a JSON object, I believe, and with certain types of key value pairs. And it will give you, and it will have to be in this kind of format, which is a little bit messy to work with. So luckily, we are using that gem to do that. That's a good question. Any other questions? So, since these keys aren't in GitHub, and if you are going to have your app into production, let me show you where you would put those environmental keys. And you would be inside of Heroku to do this. I am just going to use the image starter that we made. I'm not going to do a whole new thing. But inside of your settings, you would click on the reveal config variables. And this is where you would put each of these key value pairs. So this will give you a key and a value input box. And you would just put each of them one by one and make sure that this is a string. I would try it. Depending on your API, it may require a string. It may not have a string. So if it doesn't work with the strings, take the strings off. And it does take a while for your app to load those environmental variables. But you would need to do this here in production if you are using an API. Again, that's in the any app settings, and then reveal config vars, and their key value pairs here. Again, don't share that with anyone. Okay, any final questions before we go on to our break?
So what are the restrictions of what you can do with APIs usually?
That is listed here in the documentation. So I know with Twitter, you're only allowed to do only 100,000 requests, and I think that's per day. But for other APIs, they do have some of those restrictions as well. Like you can only do a certain number of requests each day. If you do go over, then they do have other paid options, like they might charge you things like that. So there are some restrictions that you would do. And there other restrictions would be like features you have access to, such as you're able to do everything with tweets, but you're not able to update the account, for example. That's what a lot of the APIs would do.
That makes sense. So I saw you played around with the Spotify one. Like, does it allow you to play music from your own app?
So with the Spotify API, let's go ahead and take a look at that. Spotify API. Their web player is actually in beta mode, and I actually haven't tried it. So it may work for you if you have the right code and it might be running.
Mm-hmm.
But for now, it's just in beta, so I don't think it fully works.
So if I did get it working and say I made something that like used the Spotify API and say the SoundCloud API, so I could have a playlist of songs from multiple platforms. Would I be allowed to like actually put that on the App Store and profit from it?
You may have to read the terms and conditions. As long I know that they're very specific of what you can't do, so I would have to refer to the terms and conditions with that. Because if
Okay.
you're basically making another Spotify and profiting from it, then they'll just shut down your account and possibly get sued here and there.
Yeah. I mean, it would be slightly different, but yeah, that makes sense. I have to check their specific rules.
Exactly. But yeah, try not to, when you're using someone else's API, don't make an app that is their own product, because that's an obvious reason that like they won't allow you to do that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But yeah,
I was thinking like I wouldn't just make a regular Spotify. I mean, this is all theoretical, but like combine Spotify with other music platforms so you can get different things from different ones. But I think they'd get mad.
yeah, I would be careful here and there.
Hey, Henry, so we had talked about a Yelp app a while back, but this is how I would do the keys, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So your keys would be a little bit different. It would be like with Yelp, whatever they call it.
Yeah.
It won't always be access token or consumer key. So it's whatever they call it.
Okay,
And
cool.
if it's, let's say that you're using two APIs in one, let's say we're also using the Yelp API here, and you also have keys, and if they're different names, then you can just put them in the same file. So like Yelp access token, for example. I don't know if that's what they use, but
I don't know. I haven't looked at it since we talked about it, but cool.
But yeah, you can put multiple keys and values here.
And you want to do that just so you only have to put one ignore file.
Yes. And then how you load it up and how you use it would be to grab the value. It will be env and then whatever the key is, because it's a key value pair. So it's whatever the key is, and it has to be the exact same name, spelling, and all that.
How do you, let's say you were trying to grab data from a website that didn't have developer tools built and APIs already built. How would you go about doing that? I know that's probably a whole nother topic, but just out of curiosity.
Yeah. Let me actually show you the app that I built with the Spotify API, and half of it was available to me. Like you're able to pull in playlists and all of that. But the user portion of bringing in the user, you actually have to run your own request there. And I'll show you how that looks like. Let me go ahead and add and commit, and then we'll do a final push. So we'll do get commit end of lecture and do get push origin master. But yeah, working with APIs is a very much a learning process. So it is a big learning curve.
Henry, is it considered unethical to do like JavaScript and scrape somebody's website?
Depends on what you're using the data for.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. But if you're just using it to like analyze something, like let's say you want to see how many views for vacuums, then that is a good way to use a scraper. But if you're just using it to put those products on your own products market page, then yeah, that would be unethical.
Right. Because I know, like, I was trying to do something for the coronavirus to have a stream of like the live data, but I didn't know if it would be weird to scrape it from like the CDC website or not, because it's just information. But
I'm pretty sure the CDC has developer tools for that reason.
they do. They have an API, but I was just messing around with it to try and see what they do.
Oh man. Okay. I forgot what my app is called. Let's go ahead and go into break. And for those of you that want to see this, I'll show it to you. And this will also be in the video as well, so you won't be missing much. Oh, there's underscore. Dang it, I forgot a CD. So go ahead and go on to break. Come back at 8:15. And for those of you that are sticking around, here is the Spotify API app that I was working on. And essentially, I was just remaking Apollo. But the gem helps out with getting all the playlists and songs and all that. But with authentication, I have to handle that myself. So as you can see here, let me zoom out a bit, is that you need specific parameters. And this is really depending on your API. So you need to pass in specific parameters before you can do anything else. And that goes with your client ID and your access tokens, all of that. And then you need to go to a specific URL. So with that, if you are doing that, you have to pass in data like this. You would create your data with whatever format they want it with, and then use the RESTful client, which is a way that you can have third-party out-of-app API calls, and you can go into their API website with the format that they want, because they are very picky of what they want to pass in and what format they're using. And this is what you would do if you don't have a gem to handle this for you. So you would have to make your own formatted data, what parameters they have, and the request for it to do. And then for the user, because user is always complicated, especially when you're dealing with an API, you need to find a way to refresh the tokens to keep them logged in. But for other features, you may not need this. You may not need this at all. Like for track controller, you can just do all of the tracks, for example. That will return all the tracks coming from the gem or helper gem. But for something like this, you would have to create it yourself.
Cool. It looks a little complex to jump into, but makes sense.
Yeah. How I started off with is that with the documentation, it tells you what you need to pass in and what will come back. So let's say for sample real-time tweets, you're able to do a GET request to this specific URL. And then there's items that you can pass in for the parameters.
Oh, okay.
And some documentation is better than others. Like Spotify has a really good documentation. So is Netflix. Netflix has a really good API and documentation. But Facebook and Twitter, they're a little bit more cryptic. There's a lot of data in there. So you need to dig deeper into those.
Interesting. Cool, cool. All right. Let me come back in a minute.
Are we gonna go into our groups for the final project for this last chunk?
Yes, I'll tell everyone as a group what we're doing